Okay, I think I have what will be a simple question, which is, you mentioned that there were all these authoritarian organizations that were intervening in these early charter cases. So can you name some of those organizations? What were the key organizations that were, advocating that sort of charter interpretation, and also who was behind them?
I don't know who was behind them necessarily, but one that's still around now is LEAF. At times, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association is that way, which is bizarrely named. Most of the human rights tribunals, they are very active, and I'll just say it, right? Any decision given by a human rights tribunal necessarily infringes property rights. Any remedy they offer has to steal from somebody to give it to another. So they intervene because they have a vested interest in the law being maintained in a certain way. I've wrote about this in a few journals too, about how it's very interesting. There's a phenomenon in this country where the government often doesn't have an incentive to defend its own legislation, and the results are we end up with positive law. So we end up with the government having obligations to provide resources from one party to another. Fortunately, that hasn't happened. And let me just go back here. Fortunately, that hasn't happened here yet. Although the left, again, is very organized left. The authoritarians, again, are very organized, trying to have positive rights written into the charter. And we posed an application made for a positive right to housing in Ontario recently. And it was an application made in court where about 10,000 pages of affidavit evidence from expert witnesses from around the world that Canada needs to have public housing for people. Because it's contrary to this provision, unless we provide houses, public housing for people. And our friends in America know exactly what public housing results in. Ghettos, gangs, violence, bulldozers. It's inevitable. And yet we want to go down that road in Canada. So the left is very organized and very intentional. There's a lawyer in Toronto, Clayton Ruby, who is very active in pushing that side of things. The attack on Trinity Western University, for instance, which my organization has come up and said it's a freedom of contract issue. This is an economic right. Party X wants to buy services from Party Y. They should be permitted to do so unless they're doing something otherwise illegal. He's decided that he's going to support the other side in that they should not be allowed to have that mutually agreeable contract. So there's still the vestiges of that hanging around. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you for free legal advice.
Oh, I can't do that.
I recently moved. My brand new landlord presented me with a contract.
Yeah.
The contract contains a clause that says they would like the opportunity to raise my rent by 150%. There's a law in the state that I live in that says landlords may not raise the rent by more than 10% in a 12-month period. I wouldn't sign the contract. The landlord went berserk, threatened to seize my property, my possessions, made other threats that I couldn't prove, but that happened over the phone. And my brother, who's also an attorney, said, they're allowed to do that. They're allowed to ask for any terms in a contract at all, even if it violates a law that's already been written. What do you think?
Don't want to give legal advice, but I can speak very generally. I think the way I analyze the problem is somebody has property and you want to rent it from them. It's their property, they have property rights in that, and you would like to receive a service. And if they have stipulations on your use of their property that you don't like, then maybe you should look elsewhere for services.
What about the law that says they're not allowed to raise my
See,
rent.
yeah, I don't agree with rent control laws. I think that they're harmful and they interfere with the pricing in the marketplace. And that the marketplace should set prices, not the government. So I know it's not the answer you want to hear. I'm speaking generally. I don't know about your particular circumstances, but that would be my answer.
You don't think 150%, 15 times
No.
what the law allows is not egregious?
No, I mean, you could go elsewhere, right? It's like when I walk into a grocery store and I want to buy a watermelon, and the watermelon's 150 times or 150% higher than it would be elsewhere. I can leave that store, go to another grocery store and buy a watermelon.
Even though there may be a law in effect that says,
And like I said, I disagree on a moral level with the government interfering with the pricing of goods like that, because I think it has negative consequences in the long run. Yeah. So, as a lawyer, no, they're not allowed to do that. But as someone who takes a normative view of the law, the government's law is most likely wrong.
I wonder what opinion you have on Bill C-51 because, again, like I'm not very well versed.
Okay, well. I'm not allowed to have an opinion, and that's kind of the honest truth. If I say anything, and especially if this is being recorded and broadcast, I'll be partisan and taking a position on something like that. And I work for a charity, and the CRA watches us, and we're not allowed to have opinions.
Okay.
So I will say very generally, like advising people about their rights, I'd be very concerned about the expansion of a police state. And
then I don't want to ask you about Bill C-51. I would want to ask you about any attempts or whether it's legislation or just plain action that violates civil liberties in the name of preventative security. I know somebody famous said that if you choose security over liberty, you'll have neither. However, again, maybe this is the product of fear mongering, but in a very post 9/11 world, I also do worry about something like that happening. And I don't think this is the thing, I don't think we'll ever be able to stop anybody doing harm because there's some, as we saw in Ottawa and in Quebec, one crazy person can just go and screw up something. But what argument would you give the authoritarian side of politics against preventative security?
Well, policy arguments, I think you've got a handle on it. Like from a policy point of view, if we give up our freedom to live as we want for the risk of something, then I think that should be done on a more individual basis than the state deciding first off. But everything we do has a measure of risk associated with it. From what I understand, it is still far more risky to drive in a car than it is to fly in an airplane. And it's the most common way for a child to die. And I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old at home. The most common way for a child to die is when their parents driving them. And so there's risk there. I wonder how many children between 3 and 6 or whatever have died from terrorism in Canada. I don't know of any, but it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I don't know the risks. Maybe they're being thwarted every moment and I don't realize it. I don't know. But I do know that 2 things from that driving in a car with my kids is far more dangerous probably. But then the other thing that kind of makes me sad in all this is that we're so willing to give up our freedoms, which have a very tangible and obvious way they improve our lives. Like, it's very obvious when you look at the Fraser Institute's Freedom Index, that the greater economic freedom people have, the greater their property rights, the more the courts are upholding their liberties against the encroachment of government and such. people get richer, do better, live happier lives. I mean, it's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence when you fly a satellite over Koreas that one's dark at night and one isn't. I mean, it's economic freedom, it's liberty that does this. It makes people happy. So, it kind of scares me that the current, and you know, I shouldn't say current, it's a long, politicians, you know, they earn their bread and butter by making us scared of something. That's what they do. And it just seems like this is the issue right now, so it seems novel. But no, this is what they've always done. This is the way politics works. So it frightens me and makes me sad that people are so willing to get rid of the civil liberties, which work, make us rich and happy, and we have better lives, just for the risk that something bad might happen.
Well, sorry.
So, yeah, and so I don't think there's any good basis for it, but in Canadian constitutional law, I'm not sure there's much of an argument against it. Because we just don't have a tradition of liberty in this country. If you look at our constitution from the UK, where we inherited from, it divides up all power. Every legislative matter is divided up between the provinces and the federal government. There's no conceivable topic they couldn't legislate on. And if the courts, using the common law, were to stand up and say, no, you're infringing civil liberties, well, then the government can actually just enact a positive statute and take that civil liberty away from you. We have no barrier against that happening in this country, no tradition of liberty. So, I mean, we could end up in a police state, and it's just Canadians are generally unambitious. We haven't enacted these laws yet because we haven't gotten around to it yet. So maybe it's good we have Trudeau, right? Maybe he'll not do as much. Maybe.
I've got one of your pamphlets here.
Okay.
It's a free country, and we work every day to keep it that way. But how can you say it's a free country when we know that that's not the case? It's far from it being a free country, and there's governments routinely trampling on our.
I feel like this is a gotcha question.
This thing is so vague. There's no point even writing it because it talks about liberty, but then they got their out right there, except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. So they can, virtually anything, they can create a law that tramples on your rights in virtually any area if they want to, and they do. And otherwise, Jody wouldn't have to be fighting for decades to try and realize.
Now I think this is going to harken back to, I think, 2 or 3 presentations ago, when you were talking about democracy, and I agree with a lot of what you said. But democracy, I think we have a tendency to reduce it to just voting, and it's not just voting. It's other institutions as well. Democracy includes like a free press, and our press is doing pretty well. I mean, they haven't been restrained very much. They might not always agree with them. They might be biased, yes, but I mean, if you know Ezra Levant at all or heard of him, I mean, who could tolerate that guy, right? Other than a free country. And the other thing, so we have voting rights, we have a free press.
I like Ezra.
I like Ezra too. Ezra was on the board of my organization before I was around, but so we have a free press, we have voting rights. We also have an institution of the courts. The courts themselves, they're supposed to be backstopping us against having our rights infringed. They dropped the ball, yeah, they have. And they don't do a very good job at times, and we can disagree with them, but we still have an institution of courts where we can go make a claim, get our rights vindicated, and judges are impartial for the most part. There is corruption at times, but when we look around the world, we're doing a lot better than most of the world is. So we still do have a free country, but if you're going to demand perfect freedom before the word free can be used, then I think you're never going to use the word. It should be struck from your vocabulary.
Well, it's so easy to get perfect freedom. All you have to do is just allow people to opt out. And what about voluntary consent?
No, that's, you're speaking to the choir. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, that'd be great, but, and this is, I sometimes, sorry, I'm just going to riff on that for one. I sometimes despair, honestly, because I go home and I complain to my wife and she's just shut up. And so that's got me involved in some things. I have gotten involved in politics recently because I think I'm tired of hearing myself complain. But then, you know, I stop and think, there was a point in time when this country didn't have the charter, and this country, you know, was very different than it was now. Society was different. Like, I may have made up a mythical past in my mind, but, you know, where the government was much smaller and people could make their way in the world. Was it perfect? No. But things can change, and it's just sometimes we feel claustrophobic in the now. We get stuck in the way things are right now, and we don't have a longer view of it. And the Canada 40 years from now will be very different than the Canada from right now. It will be. And we have to make sure we're the ones guiding the agenda. Because it will be different. And if we're asleep at the switch and we allow for 30 more years of charter jurisprudence to constrain us, then we're in a lot of trouble. But it doesn't have to be that way, because change is inevitable. And I don't think the type of change is inevitable.
So on that inspiring note, you know, hopefully not totally hopeless, let's thank Derek.